So to recap, basically, depends where you remember the integral that you left out. We use the example of ruku'. In the first rak'ah, the person doesn't do ruku'. Let's say they just immediately go to sujood. Once they're in sujood, if they remember in that moment, once they're in sujood, they remember they didn't do the first ruku', then what do? They stand back up straight, then they go to ruku' and they continue their prayer as in the normal order. Or if they missed ruku', they went to sujood, straight to sujood, and then in the next rak'ah, once they got to the ruku', they're in the ruku' in the next rak'ah, they remembered, subhanallah, in the first rak'ah, I didn't do ruku'. So what do? They count that everything that's done in between those 2 points is canceled. And they just have to add another rak'ah. Or count that as that they missed that rak'ah. So they just have to keep that in mind. Alhamdulillah. طيب, now we're going to talk about the congregational prayer. So what does the congregational prayer mean? What does it mean? It means al-jama'ah, praying in jama'ah. The praying in jama'ah means praying with an imam and at least one other person. So this is enough to be considered jama'ah, to pray with an imam and a follower. One imam, one follower. This is jama'ah. So in the Shafi'i school, it is a communal obligation for the Muslims of an area or community to pray the 5 daily prayers, Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha, in congregation. So what is the communal obligation? The communal obligation, it is a type of obligation that the Muslims or some of the Muslims have to do. And if some of the Muslims do it, then then all of them, they are absolved of this obligation, or they don't they're relieved of the obligation if some of them do it. So let's say there's 100 Muslims living in a community. 10 of them, they make sure that they pray the the obligatory prayers in congregation. So those other 90, they're not sinful. Those other 90, the ones that don't go to the masjid or to the musalla and pray in congregation, they're not sinful for not going. Because those 10 Muslims, let's say, that are living in that community, they're doing the communal obligation. They're taking care of it. So the rest of them are absolved, excused, they're relieved of the obligation. But if none of them do it, then all 100 of them would be sinful. All 100 of them who don't have an excuse would be sinful. So this is the case that we're going to be talking about now. So the author said, congregational prayer, section 18, praying the 5 prayers in congregation is a communal obligation, fardu kifaya, upon the free pubescent resident males who are unexcused. However, it is a personal obligation, fardu ain, in the Jumu'ah prayer upon them if they were 40 accountable inhabitants who live in buildings not in tents, because it is not an obligation on tent dwellers. The Jumu'ah prayer is also obligatory upon those who intend to stay in the place of Jumu'ah prayer for 4 complete days, excluding the day of entry and the day of exit. It is also obligatory upon those who can hear the call of a loud-voiced person standing at the closest edge of the settlement to them. So we have 2 kinds of prayers that we're talking about here. The first is the obligatory, the 5 daily prayers, the obligatory prayers, the 5 daily prayers. And so what is the judgment of praying those 5 daily prayers in jama'ah, in congregation, that means following an imam, together with an imam, even if it was just the imam and one other person. What is the judgment of praying Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha with an imam for those prayers? The judgment is that it's a communal obligation. That means some of the Muslims in that community have to do it, and the rest of them will be absolved, and the rest of them would be relieved of the obligation. That because it's a fardu kifaya. Fardu kifaya, it means that it's not every single individual accountable Muslim has to do it. It means that some of them have to do it, and then the rest would be absolved, excused. The rest would be uh, yani, free of that obligation. Now, what's the judgment of praying the Jumu'ah, the Friday prayer, in congregation? The judgment of it is that it's fardu ayn. The judgment of it is that it's fardu ayn. What does that mean? It means that it has to be prayed in congregation by every individual that matches this description that the author mentions here. So that description is the free pubescent resident males who are unexcused. Um, so we're going to explain what each of those means. Free means not a slave. So if the person has the judgment of being a slave, meaning like if he's actually literally owned. So if he was somebody's property, he would not be obligated to go to the Jumu'ah. So if he is free, meaning not a slave, pubescent, meaning not prepubescent, meaning not an infant, meaning um, what we call children, they're not obligated to go to the Jumu'ah. Like if someone has not reached the age of pubescence, if they are under 15 lunar years, or under 15 lunar years, and they haven't had any of the signs of pubescence, they are not obligated to do anything. They're not accountable, so they would not be obligated to go to the Jumu'ah. Then the next one is resident. So here, so it's important for the terminology because in English, obviously, um, it's not as exact as it is in Arabic, because Arabic is a much vaster language, a much richer language. They have very specific words for very specific things. Like there's a word in Arabic for lying down on your side, and there's a word in Arabic for lying down on your back, and there's a word in Arabic for lying on your stomach. In English, there's no such thing. In English, you say you're lying down on your side, or you're lying down on your back, or you're lying down on your stomach. In Arabic, you can say one word, and it means that, and it means lying down on your back, for example. So when they say resident, and they're referring to someone who um they're referring to someone who is not a traveler. And they're referring to someone who is muqim. So for the for both the congregational prayer for the 5 daily prayers and for the Jumu'ah prayers, these apply. So resident means muqim. It means not a traveler, not someone who's currently traveling, and with the judgment of traveling in Islam. Who are unexcused, males who are unexcused. So what's excluded is females. So females, they don't have to come to the congregational prayer for the 5 daily prayers, and they're not among the people that they would be blameworthy if there is no congregational prayer, because they're not even included in the address to begin with. Of course, they can come and they can pray in congregation, because the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he advised the companions to not prevent the women from going to the masjid. So they can come and pray, of course, but will the communal obligation be fulfilled with them? No. Are they addressed by the communal obligation to pray the 5 daily prayers? No. Now, for the Jumu'ah, we add to that those who are free, pubescent, resident males who are unexcused, they're obligated to go if the Jumu'ah had at least 40 accountable inhabitants. So this is and these are the conditions for a valid Jumu'ah, according to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. So according to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, you have to have a minimum amount of specific Muslim men with specific attributes that would make it a valid Jumu'ah. So, what are those conditions? That you have 40 free, not slaves, pubescent, not prepubescent, men, not women, inhabitants. What are the inhabitants? So it goes back to terminology. It's referring here to the Arabic term mustawtin. Mustawtin. So in Arabic, the mustawtin is defined as a person who, that place that they're living in, that land that they're living in, that is their land. I mean, that is the place that they intend to die in. The place that they intend to die in. The place where if they leave that place for a vacation or for a business trip or for work or for to take care of something, but they always come back to it. No, they always want to come back to it. They always have the intention to come back to it. It's the place where they finally, for example, settled, and they say to themselves, uh, I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna be buried here, or this is where I want to be buried. Or this is where I want to live out the rest of my life. That place is called the watan of the person, and the place where he, regardless of what happens to him in his life or wherever he goes, whether he studies abroad for school or he works in a different country, but his plan is to work for like 20 years and then retire and then come back to his homeland and be buried there. That is called the watan. So those 40 people that are in that town, that those 40 men, those 40 free pubescent men that want to pray the Jumu'ah, um, in order for it to be a valid Jumu'ah, there has to be at least 40 of them that are mustawtin. That place where they're praying the Jumu'ah, they consider they consider themselves to be permanent residents or permanent citizens of that place. Yani that even if they leave for a week or a month or some years, but still they plan to come back to that place and die there. That's where they want to be buried. So this is what they mean by inhabitants. So if we have free, male, pubescent, 30 inhabitants, and then the rest, let's say, are 100, 200 uh, people that that place to them is not their watan, is not their uh place where they want to be buried. And the rest of those people, they're just transient, and they're passing by, or they're only there for a short time, etc. Then that Jumu'ah won't be valid in the Shafi'i school. Oh yeah, and according to the saying of the 40. There's other numbers in the Shafi'i school. If I recall now, the lowest number in the Shafi'i school is 15. So it has to be at least 15 permanent citizens. But going according to the 40, if there's less than 40 permanent citizens, uh there's less than 40 free pubescent accountable unexcused males living in tents, then there won't be a valid Jumu'ah, according to Imam Shafi'i. So if those numbers exist, if they have at least 40 permanent citizens, free male pubescent Muslims living in tents or buildings, then that's what the minimum that you need in order for there to be a valid Jumu'ah. So once there is a valid Jumu'ah, then the ones who are free males, pubescent Muslims, unexcused residents that are not traveling, yani, that's what, let's say that they're only in that town for a vacation, but they're only going to stay for a month and then they're going to go back to their homeland. But while they're there for that month, even though that's not the place where they want to be buried, even though that's not their homeland, even though they're not a permanent citizen, but because the minimum amount of criteria for a valid Jumu'ah is met, so there is a valid Jumu'ah there, so that male that's free, pubescent, that's unexcused, that is a resident and not traveling, he has to go to that Jumu'ah. So there's conditions for the validity of the Jumu'ah, conditions for even to be able to have a valid Jumu'ah, and then there's conditions, or then there's conditions for being obligated to go to the valid Jumu'ah. So that's what the author mentioned there. So it is a personal obligation, fardu ayn, that means every one of these individuals that have these attributes and characteristics is obligated to go. If they are 40 accountable inhabitants, so those free pubescent resident males who are unexcused, they each one of them individually is obligated to go to the Jumu'ah if the Jumu'ah has 40 accountable inhabitants who live in buildings, not tents. And basically, if there's a valid Jumu'ah in that town, then that free pubescent resident male who is unexcused, he has to go. He can't miss out on it. He can't skip out on it. And it's a personal obligation, and him personally, individually, he's obligated to go. Now, we said that if the person is a resident, that means he's not a traveler. So what if the person, he is, let's say he goes to New York for 3 days or for 2 days, and one of the days that he's there is Jumu'ah. So he's there in New York, he's going there for a meeting. Then as soon as he does that meeting, he's coming back. He doesn't live in New York. He doesn't even know anybody in New York. He just is going there for work. But one of those days is Friday's Jumu'ah. So does he have to go because he's a free male that's pubescent and and he doesn't have a religious excuse? Does he have to go? The answer would be no, because he's considered a traveler. He's not. He doesn't have to go because while he's there in New York, he's judged as a traveler. He's not judged as a resident. Because why is he judged as a traveler? He's only staying 2 days. So he doesn't have to go to the Jumu'ah. So Alhamdulillah for Islam and the clarity and the easy to follow rules. So that's what the author is referring to when he says the Jumu'ah prayer is also obligatory upon those who intend to stay in the place of Jumu'ah prayer for 4 complete days, excluding the day of entry and the day of exit. What that means is that the way that you count for your judgment as a traveler is based on that. So let's say the person flies into New York on Saturday night. So his plane lands in New York at 9:30 p.m. right on Saturday, and on after the sunset of Saturday. We're going to go according to what the Westerners they say was Saturday night, meaning they say Saturday night is the night after the sun sets on Saturday. So on 8:30 Saturday night, his plane lands on in New York. So when does he start counting? He starts counting by the dawn of the next day. So Sunday, when the Fajr starts, that's considered to be the first day. And so he has until the fourth day before sunset to travel, so he can still be considered a traveler. So the first day is Sunday, second day is Monday, third day is Tuesday, fourth day is Wednesday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So on Wednesday, if he doesn't leave that place, if he doesn't travel before Maghrib of Wednesday, then he will no longer be in the judgment of a traveler, and he would have to do his prayers in the normal, complete way. He won't be able to shorten the 4 rak'ah prayer to 2 rak'ahs. He won't be able to combine the Dhuhr with the Asr or the Maghrib with the Isha, as is the case in the Shafi'i school. I know that in the Hanafi school, there's no combining except in a specific situation in the Hajj. But when somebody's traveling, other than that, outside of Al Hajj, there's no combining. So in the Hanafi school, you don't combine Dhuhr with Asr or Maghrib with Isha when you're traveling. But in the Hanafi school, you have to shorten the 4 rak'ah prayer. I know that. You have to shorten it. So you have to pray Dhuhr 2 rak'ahs. You have to pray Asr 2 rak'ahs in their time, but you have to pray them 2 rak'ahs. So if that person, as long in the Shafi'i school, if he's still within um, if he's still within that time frame, if he arrives, let's say Saturday night, 8:30 p.m., and then so we count Sunday as day one, Monday as day two, Tuesday as day three, Wednesday as day four. So before Maghrib of Wednesday, if he travels again, then he's still considered a traveler. If he doesn't plan to leave until, let's say, uh Friday or Sunday or Saturday, then from the moment that he lands, if that's his intention, is that from the moment that he lands, he plans to stay there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then he leaves on that next Sunday. If that's his plan, that's his intention, then the moment he lands, the moment he touches down, the moment he enters into that town where he plans to stay for 7 days, he's no longer considered a traveler immediately. So he would have to go to the Jumu'ah if there's a valid Jumu'ah there. Now, what does it mean when the author said it is also obligatory upon those who can hear the call of a loud voiced person standing at the closest edge of the settlement to them? Sometimes there's a town, and then outside of that town, there's like a countryside or a rural area, a desert or a prairie, or just like wilderness. And sometimes there's Muslims that they live in the desert or in that wilderness, and um, they live in tents, and they move around, etc. But they don't live in the town. So do those people that live in those tents outside of the town, do they have to go to the Jumu'ah that's in that town? So the answer is based on if we were to hypothetically say that someone with a loud voice would stand at the edge of the town that's closest to those Bedouins. If they were to make the adhan at the edge of that town, and they were standing like in a flat land, and the wind was moderate, if they were to make the adhan, would those Bedouins, would they be able to recognize that that's the adhan, even if they can't hear every single word? But will they be able to know, oh, that's the adhan? If the answer is yes, then they have to go to the town for the Jumu'ah. If the answer is no, then they don't. And that's how that's determined. Any questions about that before moving on? Um, Alhamdulillah, I know that for the those that are not, let's say, trained in the Islamic law, some of these concepts might be new to hear, but that's the Islamic law, and it's very simple and straightforward. When you understand, I mean, what they're basing, or when you understand the conditions and the integrals, you understand that, then you understand the judgment. Or you could also immerse yourself in your mind, hypothetically, into that situation. Let's say you're living with some Bedouins in a tent outside of the town. If you're too far from the town to the point where if someone in that town, hypothetically, were to make adhan at the edge of the town, would it reach you? If the answer is no, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to pray Jumu'ah, because the people who live in tents, they're not obligated to pray Jumu'ah. If you're able to hear or recognize that what's that sound that you're hearing is the adhan, even if you can't hear every single word, then if you're in that Bedouin living in that encampment, then you have to go over to that town and pray the Jumu'ah. And this is for the obligation. And why is that important? Because there's limits, there's parameters, there's lines. There's the difference between what you're obligated to do and the difference between what you're not obligated to do. The difference between you fulfilling an obligation and doing what your Lord ordered you to do, and the difference between uh committing a sin. So that's very specific, very exact. So there's a line, there's a boundary. We cannot cross it. So the person, and of course the Muslim, needs to be aware of this and focus on this, that he is making, that he's doing his obligation the way that and he should. And subhanAllah, that requires a certain type of blessing that the person gets, like to find out their situation, to be aware, like, do I have to do this, do I have to do that? That's a good sign for the Muslim. So first question here is, that a must to shorten one's prayer when you travel? According to Imam Abu Hanifa, yes. When you're a traveler, you have to pray shortened. According to Imam Shafi'i, you have the option. You don't have to shorten or combine if you don't want to. What does that mean before I said Alhamdulillah? Can you clarify this? Not sure what the meaning is there. But yeah, for the last part, we're saying that if someone is living in outside of the town of Jumu'ah, in the wilderness or in the desert, and they're living in tents like an encampment, and then are those people obligated to go to that town and pray the Jumu'ah? Because they themselves, they don't have to do a Jumu'ah. They're not obligated to do a Jumu'ah in their encampment. So while they're living as Bedouins in a camp, they themselves They don't have to pray the Jumu'ah. They don't have to make a Jumu'ah so that they pray. But do they have to go to the town where the Jumu'ah is being held? So the answer to that question would be determined and known based on if someone were to call the adhan from the edge of the Jumu'ah town, and that person has a loud voice, of course. So they were to call the adhan at the edge of the Jumu'ah town. Would the people that are living in that encampment, would that adhan reach them to the extent where they would be able to recognize that what is being said is the adhan? And so if the answer is yes, then they would have the people of that encampment who are living outside of the town, they would have to go to the Jumu'ah. And if the answer is no, then they wouldn't have to go to the Jumu'ah. The next question is, how long is one considered a traveler to shorten his or her prayer abroad? So according to the Shafi school, it's 4 days, 4 complete days. So excluding the day of entry and exit. And we gave a scenario of that. Like the person flies in, his plane lands at 8:30 p.m. So then Sunday is day 1, Monday is day 2, Tuesday is day 3, Wednesday is day 4. So on Wednesday before sunset, they have to travel again in order to still be considered a traveler. And if they intend to stay there, let's say for 7 days, the moment that they land, they're not considered a traveler anymore. So if you're, let's say, originally from uh what country should you pick? So if you're originally from um France, that's where you were born, that's where your parents were born, that's where you lived your whole life. You're originally from France. So then you want to go study at someone might say Harvard University, right? So you travel from Paris to Harvard. And how long do you plan to stay there studying at Harvard? You plan to stay there at least for a semester. So let's say a semester is like 8 weeks. So the moment that you land in Harvard, now you're considered a resident there. You're not a traveler anymore. The moment that you land in Boston, you're no longer a traveler. So the time that you were flying from Paris to Boston, you're considered a traveler. The moment you arrive at Boston, with the intention that you're going to stay there for 8 weeks, then you're no longer a traveler. That's how it is in the Shafi'i school. I know that in the Hanafi school, they have a longer time, but I don't have any details for that. So I would like to know about what this means before I said Alhamdulillah. If you can clarify for that, I can clarify that as well. Uh, طيب. So continuing on. So everything is clear so far up till now? Because now we're going to talk about the conditions for the valid Jumu'ah. And these things have to be done before the Jumu'ah in order for the Jumu'ah to be valid. So the conditions for a valid Jumu'ah prayer are to be performed within the early afternoon prayer time, al-dhuhr. Yani, the time in which the Jumu'ah is performed has to be during the dhuhr time. So if it's done before the dhuhr time, it's not valid. And if it's the dhuhr time goes out, then there can be no Jumu'ah. The next condition is for the 40 inhabitants to hear the 2 speeches during the prescribed time and before the Jumu'ah prayer. So remember, we're talking about the conditions for the Jumu'ah prayer. What does that mean? The actual prayer itself. The speeches are not the prayer itself. They are requirements for the prayer to be valid. So those 40 inhabitants that we mentioned, yani the free pubescent males that are unexcused and that they are inhabitants, yani that they're permanent citizens of that place, that's their homeland where they have the intention to live out the rest of their lives and to be buried there no matter how often they travel far away. those 40, they have to hear the two speeches before the prayer. The integrals, yeah, the integrals of those speeches. The next condition is to be prayed in congregation by the aforementioned 40 inhabitants. So those 40 that are inhabitants, free, pubescent, unexcused males, they have to pray the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation, meaning, as it's going to come, Yani, that the Imam, he has to make the intention that he's the Imam when he says Allahu Akbar to enter into the prayer. And the followers, they have to make the intention that they're following the Imam when they say Allahu Akbar to enter into the prayer. Okay, Alhamdulillah. So congregation means that you have to have the intention to pray in congregation. So the Imam has to intend that he's the Imam when he's saying Allahu Akbar, and the followers, they have to intend that they're following the Imam when they're saying Allahu Akbar. This is what it means in congregation. For there not to be another Jumu'ah prayer simultaneous with it in the same settlement. So it's a condition that there is not another valid Jumu'ah in the same town, and in the same place that's considered to be Islamically one town. And the way that that is determined Islamically is not through the city limits or what the local government has outlined to be this city or that city. No, it go Islamically. The way that a town is judged is if it's a cluster, if it's all one cluster of residential buildings, then even if it extends for 100 miles, then this is one town. And even if, like, let's say after a certain street name or a certain street number, they call it, for example, a different city, but because those residential buildings are clustered together, meaning that there's no separation between them, then it's all considered one town. So keep that in mind when we speak about these cases. But anyway, the point is that in that one town, there can only be one Jumu'ah. There can only be one Jumu'ah. So even if the town is 100 miles big, one single town, 100 miles, all those people, they have to go to one Jumu'ah. All those Muslims, they have to go to one place for one Jumu'ah. If the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, of one Jumu'ah prayer preceded that of another, then the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. This is the case if the people were able to congregate in one place. However, if it is hard for them to congregate in one place, then both the former and the latter would be valid. All right, so um, the apparent text of the Shafi'i school and of Al-Imam al-Shafi'i himself, he says, whether or not the town is big, everyone has to pray Jumu'ah in one place. And the companions of Al-Shafi'i, they interpreted his statement that it means whether the town is big or small, everyone has to pray Jumu'ah in one place, except if it's difficult. Except if it's a difficulty for everyone to get together in the same spot to pray Jumu'ah. So the companions of Shafi'i, they deduce within the framework of the Shafi'i school that if there is some difficulty, if they're not able to gather in one place to pray the Jumu'ah, then they are permitted to have more than one Jumu'ah based on the need. So they can pray Jumu'ah in more than one place based on the need. So if two is enough, then they pray two only, and there can't be a third place that has a Jumu'ah. If three is enough for the need, then they can only pray three, and there can't be four. It's not like how it is nowadays. Be very careful about that. It's not like how it is nowadays, where you have like supposedly five masjids on the same block, and they all have Jumu'ah, and one of them has Jumu'ah at 1 hour, and the other one has Jumu'ah the next hour, the other one has Jumu'ah another hour. This does not work. And in the case where the need is fulfilled. So be very careful about that. And on top of that, be very careful about these places that don't even have a valid Jumu'ah. Why don't they have a valid Jumu'ah? Because the person supposedly that's leading the Jumu'ah is a kafir. And he's someone who has deviated outside the creed of Al-Islam. Someone who says that Allah is sitting on the throne. Someone who believes that Allah is established on the throne. Someone who believes that Allah rose above the throne. Someone who believes that Allah has organs. Right? There's a lot of those people around. And a lot of them, they have, let's say, imam positions because the committees and the boards and the groups or the corporations or the whatever committees that control them, they stem from one place and they have a certain agenda and they have a misguided belief and they put their speakers and their whoever they want to put on the minbar. So that's a factor where it would not be a valid Jumu'ah. So you can't even go there for Jumu'ah. And for some Sunni Muslims, it might be the case that in that town where he lives, there's no valid Jumu'ahs because the imams there, they are anthropomorphist body worshippers. They say that Allah is sitting on the throne. They say that Allah comes down to the first heaven. They say that Allah has organs. They say that Allah rose over the throne or established himself on the throne, etc. They attribute emotions and all types of things to Allah. So because of that, obviously they would not be Muslims because we covered the creed already, where it's a known creed of Islam that Allah Ta'ala is not like us in any way. So these people, they would be non-Muslims because of their the corruption in their creed, and so their Jumu'ah won't be valid. So they won't have a valid Jumu'ah because in order for the Jumu'ah to be valid, obviously the person has to be Muslim, so it wouldn't be a valid Jumu'ah. So there's that scenario. There's also a scenario where the Sunni Muslim, there won't be a valid Jumu'ah in his town because even if, let's say, those Imams, they're Sunni and they have the correct creed, that Allah exists without a place, etc. But because they're ignorant and because they never learned formally, they never studied the Islamic law, they never learned the basics of the conditions of the Jumu'ah and the integrals. So they don't even do the Jumu'ah right. So they don't do the integrals of the Jumu'ah. They just do something. They stand up there and they talk and they do something, but it's not a valid Jumu'ah because they're missing an integral. And you're gonna see what the integrals are in the Shafi'i school. So they wouldn't even be doing the Jumu'ah right. Just like a lot of people are ignorant and they don't even do the prayer right, and they don't even know that they're doing it incorrectly. But because of it, the prayer is invalid. So that happens too with supposed imams that they don't know that they're leaving out something in the Jumu'ah that by leaving it out makes it invalid. Um, so that Muslim in that town, he would have any valid Jumu'ahs there, so he wouldn't. He just has to pray Dhuhr. Another example of that type of situation is, let's say, and this is rare, obviously. The Imam is Sunni and he has a correct creed and he knows, for example, how to do Jumu'ah properly. But guess what? That Imam faces the wrong direction. The Qibla in that place is wrong. And that's something that happens a lot um in the North America and in Canada, is that they face the wrong direction. They face northeast from America, supposedly to point themselves towards Mecca. And obviously, this is incorrect for many reasons. Number one, because northeast, if someone faces northeast, or someone, let's say, travels northeast from America, and they never change their direction, they stay constantly following northeast, then they will never get to Mecca. Never, never, never. Because where is Mecca relative to America is to the south, right? Mecca is, let's say, the majority, or I would say all of America, except maybe like some parts, I don't know, maybe some parts of Texas or California, but the majority of America is above the equator. And Mecca is like at the equator. So if if so that tells us, that lets us know that North America is north of Mecca. That lets us know that North America is above Mecca, because Mecca is to the south of America, and in terms of position. So how could someone travel north to get to a place that's to the south of them? This is absurd. This is absurd. So so what does that mean? That means if the person in North America or Canada is facing northeast and they don't change their direction, they don't say, "Oh, because the Earth is curved, I'm magically going to my direction is going to change and is going to point down towards Mecca." Without that, if the person just stays, if they start walking northeast and they keep on walking, 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 they'll never reach Mecca. Never. So, regardless of the curvature of the earth and regardless of the shape of the earth, the cardinal directions do not change. And since Mecca is to the south of us, of America, then for sure we do not face north to reach the south. And we don't say, "Oh, but our direction is going to uh, automatically change because the earth is curved." We say, no. If you keep the same direction without changing, you will never um, reach Mecca. So that's another thing. So if all the places that are in that person's town, if they're all facing northeast, then he cannot pray there because he wouldn't be facing the Qibla. It wouldn't be a valid Jumu'ah because the prayer won't be valid, because in order for the prayer to be valid, you have to face the Qibla, which is the Kaaba. The one who lives in America or Canada and he faces northeast, he's going to be facing London. He's not going to be facing Mecca. So always remember this rule. Take this rule. We talked about this rule already. Abu Hanifa, radiallahu anhu, what did he say? He said, the east is the qibla of the people of the west is the qibla of the people of the east, the north is the qibla of the people of the south is the qibla of the people of the north. This is the rule of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa and the consensus documented by him about how to determine the qibla wherever you are. So where is America relative to Mecca? It's to the west. So where do we face if we want to face Mecca? We face to the east. And in terms of the position of north or south, where is America relative to Mecca? It's to the north of it. Everybody's got to say that. No, I had never met a person who says that Mecca, or who says that America is south of Mecca. I've never met someone that says that. Now, if there is more than one Jumu'ah in the town, and it's without a need, if there is another Jumu'ah without need, then the Jumu'ah that starts first is the valid one, and the one that starts second is the invalid one. So how do we determine which one starts first and which one starts second? The way that we determine is by the pronunciation of the letter R of the Ra in the saying Allahu Akbar. So if a person says Allahu Akbar, um, yani what that letter, the Ra, it is how we determine that the person enters into the Jumu'ah prayer. So the Imam of the first Jumu'ah, he said Allahu Akbar, and he entered into the prayer, and he said the Ra of Allahu Akbar before the Imam of the second Jumu'ah says it, then that first Jumu'ah is the valid one, and that second one is invalid. And if it is not known which one is first or second, then both of them are invalid. Alhamdulillah. Now we're going to talk about the integrals of the two speeches. Everything is clear up till there? Okay, yeah, alhamdulillah. We'll stop there. We'll do the integral next week, inshallah. طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم